Yeah, well, working on Campbell Live, TV3's Campbell Live program, we had, I guess you'd call it a bit of a social conscience. So we wouldn't just do stories that were topical or newsy for that day. We also choose a topic and sort of go deep into that. And one of the ones that we all felt pretty strongly about and seemed to get good reception when we did these stories was sort of poverty within New Zealand.
And his wife Diane usually earn between them as two working professionals, but it's the average wage, and somewhere between 30 to 40% of all New Zealand households have to get by on this income or less.
What do you say to people who say, oh come on, a box of Weet-Bix is not expensive, the parents must be wasting money?
Try living on the minimum wage. Try filling your car up, and how much does it cost you? $100 or so.
And so one area we looked at was child poverty and children going hungry. So we did some pretty strong stories and strong sort of experiments on that theme. One story in particular, I did one called, which has been known as the lunchbox story, and where we compared a lunchbox of a kid at a decile 1 school with a lunchbox with a kid at a decile 10 school. And I also asked them if they had breakfast or not. And it was quite striking at the decile 10 school, yep, they'd all had breakfast and all had wonderful lunches. And then just 20 minutes drive away at another school, decile 1 school, suddenly 3/4 of the kids hadn't had breakfast. Many of them didn't even have any lunches, and then those lunches that there were just a packet of chips or a Coca-Cola or something like that. So really, really unhealthy. And I remember when those results came out, when the kids, showed us what they had for lunch, it was really quite heartbreaking seeing either the fact they had nothing to eat for lunch or had this desperately unhealthy lunch. So it was pretty heartbreaking, I have to say. Topic of child poverty so much because it's just the most unfair, most unjust issue around in some ways, because it's whatever's going on in the family, it's not the child's fault. But of course they're most affected. If they don't have enough to eat, then of course they can't concentrate like any of us. You can't concentrate, you can't learn, and if you don't learn, well, you're not going to learn those skills which are going to help them break out of those poverty traps. So that cyclical nature of poverty was something why we kept on going back to those stories and really did with them a passion, because we really thought we were making a difference, and it was a topic that we thought was important to cover.
Sequence of stories. So one, I volunteered my own family of 4, so we had 2 young kids, my wife and I, to live on one average wage. So it wasn't the bottom, the completely bottom of the pie with no money. It was an average wage, but just to demonstrate how tough it was to live on even that small amount. And so we basically gave ourselves some budgets, realistic budgets for what rent and bills would have to be paid, and then lived with the remainder money for a week. And I can tell you things got very, very tight. Our fridge was scarily empty, I recall, by the end of the week. Our meals are very, very basic. School lunches for the kids were much more basic than they usually are. And it was quite a powerful illustration of just how hard so many families across the country do it week in, week out. I mean, we were fortunate and privileged that this was only a week-long experiment for us, but of course, for so many families, this is their daily existence year after year. So that was pretty powerful, and I remember the reaction from we got a heck of a lot of feedback to those stories, people really saying how much it had touched them and how much they wanted to help. So we had this very strong partnership with Kids Can, whose whole mission is to get food into schools, no questions asked. If you're hungry, if you don't have lunch, then there will be something there for you to eat for free. And so we did a lot of stories with Julie Chapman from Kids Can, and amazing organisation. They were really great at getting all together, all the big corporates to donate the food, and then it went beyond food and became different toiletries and shoes and coats, and they would give this to the schools free of charge. Anybody that needed this stuff could could access it. So we followed them around and went to these schools and helped obviously the fundraising. As people through our stories, they saw the good work that this organisation was doing, so that actually helped with donations of the goods but also money for Kids Can. And then ultimately there was an incredibly satisfying sort of outcome a few years later, I think 2019, 3 years ago. So this was kind of 7 years after we started that process, this campaign of these types of stories. The government actually kind of agreed with us, and then they started giving some funding to Kids Can and to the schools directly to actually provide free meals in schools for kids who need them. So that was, I remember the day that news came through. I think I actually wrote to the Prime Minister to thank her for that outcome. It was incredibly satisfying. I mean, it took many years, but I'm no doubt it was inspired, or at least helped along by some of our campaign journalists. At the end of the day, even if, and often it's not the case, often there is no spare money and the parents are doing their very best and there's no wastage at all. But even in the cases where there is potentially some wastage or some misspending, and that's depriving the children, at the end of the day, in both cases, it's not the child's fault. So for me, getting that food directly to the children so that they can concentrate and therefore learn, and therefore hopefully break some of these cycles of poverty, for me, it's always about targeting the child. It's about, it's not the child's fault. Child needs education. That's the only hope for our society. So I'm always a big fan of supporting those charities that really get the goods to where they need them, and especially for children.